Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Stay at Home and Brew It. I'm Jeff Perot, and the guys right now won't be probably joining me too much because we're running around filling orders, but today we're going to talk about something which we've had questions before here in the shop, which is about multiple dry hop additions. Now, with the rising popularity in a lot of the IPAs, hazy IPAs, heavily hopped IPAs, everyone's trying to pack as much aroma as they can into their IPAs, into their hoppy beers. And so you'll see a lot of people doing very late kettle additions, whirlpool additions, and then a lot of times a lot of dry hop additions. I know there's a number of breweries actually around in our area that will have their IPAs that they release and double IPAs and triple IPAs, and they'll tout that they're double hopped or triple hopped or triple dry hopped or double dry hopped. And a lot of times they're doing things like that to try and maximize hop aroma and create a more complex aroma, profile in their IPA. So a lot of times home brewers, we want to do that as well. Now, as we look at doing that, then sometimes what gets thrown around is this idea that, well, you got to be careful because of oxidation. Okay, so do I or do I not? Well, the answer unfortunately is yes and no. Which I know you're looking and thinking, okay, thanks, Jeff, that really helps a lot. But, hear me out a second. So with a single addition, or single dry hop addition, whether it be 1 ounce, 3 ounce, 5 ounce, 10 ounce, whatever it may be, the likelihood of you getting oxidation from that is pretty minimal because of the fact that if you look at it, you already have a nice layer of CO2 in there. And, if you've transferred in, hopefully you've like if you're dry hopping in your primary, you already have a layer of CO2 in there. So the possibility of getting a lot of oxidation is very minimal. Now, if you move your beer into another container after primary to condition on the dry hops, then one of the things you might want to do is kind of look at the idea of the possibility that there could be some oxidation. Now, as I say this, I've done it before and not noticed any oxidation in my beers on a single dry hop addition, but something can kind of become a little bit concerning when you do more than that. Now, what I'll do is oftentimes if I'm moving my beer into another container to condition, I usually try and flush that container with CO2. So I usually have my tank and my regulator with hose hooked up, and I will flush CO2, or flush the O2 out of my carboy by using a healthy amount of CO2. Now what this does is this allows me to siphon the beer in there, and for there to be this layer of CO2 that stays in there. And as many of us know, CO2 is definitely heavier than oxygen. So what's going to happen is you'll have that nice layer of CO2. Now, a lot of times also, I'll have put the hops already in there, so there's no worry. But then when you start introducing more hops, every time you do that, again, like I said, the oxygen is not quite as heavy as the CO2. But the problem is you start adding more and more every time you're opening your fermenter. You're introducing that possibility of the oxygen as well as other things kind of getting in there, and that can become probably the big problem and the problem that the concern of what we're even talking about today. So if you're wanting to do multiple dry hop additions and you want to be very, very careful, then you need to look at probably flushing your fermenter or flushing your container with some CO2 to be able to do that. So now here at Texas Brewing, all of our hops, we seal them in these Mylar bags, and we also flush them with nitrogen. So your hops, you're not having to worry about there being oxygen in here. Our Amarillo and also Calista, which, I don't know, Calista always reminds me of Temple of Doom. Calista, soon Calista will rule the world. But enough of that. One of the things is, as you're putting these hops in, the hops will be fresh and the hops are fine. But if you're really wanting to be careful about the possibility of oxidation, you'll need to have a setup in which you can inject CO2 into your fermenter. Now, the way you do this is kind of like I said, you'll have your CO2 in your regulator, your hose. A lot of us, if you have a kegging setup, you'll have your disconnects, or your quick disconnects, whether it be your ball lock or your pin lock, and you can take those off, and you can go ahead and then inject the CO2 directly with one of your air lines into your fermenter. Now be careful when you do this, because you don't want to you don't want to disturb the beer too much, and it's not like you want to crank it up to 45 psi and then cause a ruckus in your fermenter. That's not what you're trying to do. You're just wanting to gently put it in there. So make sure you check your pressure gauge and don't turn the psi up too much. All you're needing to do is just allow some to flow in there nice and easy. When you do that, then you can go ahead and introduce your hops in there. If you're doing this, then you should have little to no oxidation if you're concerned about that. But what you can do at home, and actually something we're thinking of trying here one of these days soon, is to try two beers side by side. Maybe do an Amarillo and Calista combination. And because Calista, if you're not familiar with it, has a lot of stone fruit, berry, and interesting things like that when used as late hops or dry hops. Amarillo, of course, has a lot of nice citrus notes, grapefruit, and things like that. But there are a lot of these hop combinations that you can use in the course of your dry hopping, and also in making sure you're minimizing the possibility of oxidation. With that, let's see, we don't have any questions right now so far, but just to kind of go over it again for those of y'all who are joining us a little bit late in the show, is when you're dry hopping a beer, if you're dry hopping towards the end of primary and keeping it in there, the idea of worrying about oxidation is minimal. But if you're moving it into a secondary vessel to condition on the dry hops, you're going to need to probably find a way to flush that with some CO2. That way you can ensure that your beer is not coming in contact with a lot of oxygen and risking the possibility of oxidation. And to do that, as I was mentioning, you'll need to have a setup, like a kegging setup, where you have your regulator, your CO2 tank, and some hoses to be able to inject it in. And I guess no questions. Pretty easy show, huh, Tyler? So, again, thank you for watching, and thank you for staying at home and brewing, and watching here, Stay at Home and Brew It. Oh, there is a question. Oh. Okay. Edward is asking, can fining and cold crashing take away the benefits, aroma of dry hopping? What's the best way order to do all three? When I've done fining agents, I've not noticed any reduction in my hop aroma. Now, of course, with fining agents, if you're doing a lot of dry hops, it gets very hard to kind of keep it clear when you're introducing all of this extra material in there. But if you, and the same goes with cold crashing, I've not noticed any degradation of my hop aroma when I cold crash. And usually what I will do is once I've finished fermenting, I cold crash and then I dry hop at the same time. Years ago, I met actually Matt Brynildson from Firestone Walker, and I asked him a couple of these questions about what temperature does he dry hop at and some things like that. And he said that normally at the brewery they dry hop pretty cold. So when they've chilled it down, they actually dry hop pretty cold. He said they actually never leave their beer on dry hops any longer than 3 days, which I thought that was kind of an interesting little thing. And I asked him why, and he said one of the things he began to encounter is that when he left the beers on for longer than 3 days on the dry hops, he began to detect a little bit of a vegetal kind of background, almost even sometimes grassy, but almost a little vegetal thing going on in the background. So normally when I dry hop, I'll do 3, maximum 5 days. When I first started brewing, I would leave a beer on dry hops for 2 weeks sometimes, and that was way too much. Let's see. So going back to your question, can fining and cold crashing take away the benefits, aroma of dry hopping? It doesn't in my experience. Let's see. What's the best way to order to do all three? No, again, what I would say is, what I would do is I would go ahead and crash it, and then I'm assuming you're going to be moving it into a secondary container of some kind. So I do my fining agents in there, and then I would also dry hop. I guess it also depends upon if you're wanting to be able to reclaim any of your hops, like if you're using whole leaf hops. I know some people are beginning to do that, where they reclaim their whole leaf dry hops and then use them in another beer. But I've not noticed any degradation of hop aroma. And I think that's about it on questions. Are you seeing any others come in, Tyler? All right. All All right. Well, again, thank you all of you for joining us for Stay at Home and Brew It. We appreciate all your support, your orders, and your patience with us as we fill those orders. And we hope that all of y'all are doing well and staying safe. And again, if you're going to be doing some multiple dry hops and you have any questions, feel free to contact us here by email or phone call. If you have any questions about brewing, feel free to contact us as well. And we got another show coming up tomorrow, and we'll have shows already set for next week. So we've got a lot planned for you of doing some more things on ingredients and doing some more specials on how to create your own recipes from scratch, and some of those things coming up. So thank you much, and stay at home.